Please do not interrupt the speakers, but also do not hesitate to unmute your microphone and do your questions at the end of each talk. Also, I want to inform you that the organizers asked me for recording this session. We will have 4 talks, and we will start with Professor Maia Angelova from the University of Melbourne, who will speak about signatures and for acute and chronic insomnia from Locomotor time series data. Maia, please, you can start.
Thank you, George. Good day and good evening and good morning whenever you are. Can you see my screen?
Yes, everything is okay.
Okay, so my talk would be for data-driven models for acute and chronic insomnia, which are derived entirely from physical motion data measured with actigraphy. First, the acknowledgement, in case I'm short of time. So our collaborators, our data are from sleep laboratories at Monash University, Melbourne, and sleep laboratory at Northumbria University at UK. Also, we collaborate with Charité, Germany. And these are the people working on the sleep project, and these are our funders. So in this short talk, I'll speak a little bit about the motivation, the data collection, the methodology, including time series analysis using dynamical systems for time series analysis, and features engineering, the main objectives and characteristics of these 2 conditions, which are not well understood from physiological and neurological point of view, and our aim to develop automatic detection of acute and chronic insomnia, different from healthy sleeps, and conclusions in future work. So sleep is very important part of our life, as we sleep about 1/3 of our life. Sleep depends on many different factors, including light, circadian rhythms, our healthiness, chronic conditions, our cognitive functions, and so on. And also during night, our bodily functions and organism recharge and restore to continue the productive work for the next day. The motivation of this study is first insomnia, and we started with acute insomnia, which is very new sort of field of study for sleep physiologists and psychologists, and it is not well understood. The characteristics of the conditions as well as for chronic insomnia are not well understood, and also the differences between them from physiological point of view. So for sleep research, the golden standard is polysomnography, namely measuring in the sleep lab signals from the body, such as brain waves with EEG, heart rate with ECG, like oxygen saturation, and so on. However, for the cases of acute and chronic insomnia, the night that are spent in sleep lab are not always able to produce any differences, because it is known that for insomniacs, when they change the environment, when they change the bedroom, they can have a very good night's sleep. Secondly, it is extremely expensive because to collect the data, people have to be 2 nights at the sleep labs. And in UK, it costed about £100 for a night. And also we need a reasonable size of study of both people with the condition and normal sleepers. And finally, as you can see from the picture, the measurements are invasive in a way that you need many sensors. And with so many sensors, it's not quite certain whether a person can have a good night's sleep. So polysomnography is not really used to classify and detect the conditions, This is basically self-reported condition, and clinicians like sleep clinicians decide whether a person has insomnia or not, mainly from sleep diaries. So the purpose of our work was, we had two actually aims. One is to avoid the subjective collection of sleep diaries, because there are lots of mistakes. And secondly, to develop tools which would allow the pre-detection of the condition in the environment of the home. So the data collected for this type of research is mainly signals from sensors. These sensors could be in the sleep lab or could be wearable devices. Again, our long-term program is to use wearable devices. And the signals has different characteristics. They have different length, like EEG and ECG signals are short time series, while physical movement signals collected with accelerometry are long time series, because data are collected over 2 weeks. Also, we can have signals that detect non-disruptive flow for healthy conditions, for example, healthy sleep or healthy brain or healthy physical activity or healthy learning, or can be used to detect chronic conditions or illness such as epilepsy or insomnia. So insomnia, in terms of the two cases that we study, acute and chronic, their main difference is based on duration. Acute insomnia is shorter condition, which appears for 1 night to few weeks, and almost everybody has this 1 night non-sleep nights. The causes could be significant life stress, illness, or emotional, physical discomfort, or environmental discomfort. Chronic insomnia is a long-term condition. It appears at least 3 nights per week for more than a month or longer. The causes could be depression or anxiety, chronic stress, pain, or discomfort. Now, physiologists and neuroscientists do not really know the physical and physiological background of these two conditions. They know the manifestation, but that they don't really know what and how this is caused, in what type of the sleep stages differences appear, and how do they appear. So here we have, sorry. Something. So I want to show you the raw signal, but for some reason, yeah. The raw signal, here you can see for 2 individuals, 1 night of actigraphy. And actigraphy is measures accelerometry, free axial accelerometry, in our case with Philips Axti watch. The blue picture indicates normal sleep. The red color indicates acute insomnia for 3 individuals of age 21. For these studies, we focus on young individuals, aged from 18 to 40, because aging brings additional dimension to sleeplessness, not necessarily insomnia. So, like for time series which show periodic features, a typical method for investigation is the cosinor analysis. However, and you can see the cosinor analysis with broken line on the right-hand diagram. However, it does not detect the differences for insomnia first, because these are nighttime signals, and the signal is very noisy, and also amplitude is very small. So we needed to derive our own method, which is based on singular spectrum analysis. So the method automatically detects the time for people to go to sleep. And it's given with a solid line. And as you can see that there are significant differences between the cosinor analysis and the singular spectrum analysis. So, however, we don't have a physical model. We don't understand what are the underlying mechanisms what changes. So in these cases, we use data-driven models, which are derived from the data alone. So in our case, we use only actigraphy data. So these are locomotor motion collected over 2 weeks. However, we selected 1 week of signal to avoid missing data or cases when the person accidentally or non-accidentally removed the watch. So we have 7 nights of data for 26 individuals with acute insomnia and about 30 healthy controls. And for the chronic insomnia, we had 8 individuals, 40 pairs of chronic insomniacs and their bed partners. So what we do first, we take the signal and we do the normal data pre-procession. Because the actigraphy signals are very noisy, in this case, we apply filters on the amplitudes at 0, which means no noise removal, 20%, 40%, and 80%. So for each type of signal, we handcraft features, 12 features that we extract from the signals. So we have statistical features, such as mean, standard deviation. You can see them at the low left part of the graph. We have dynamical features such as Poincaré maps, sample entropy, and the last features are the equivalent to sleep diary features, but extracted from the actigraphy signal. So these are time to sleep, sleep efficiency, and so on. The last 5 features that you can see here on the graph. So the first picture is the raw signal, and you can see the differences between the red, which is insomnia, acute in this case, and chronic, and normal. The diagram below shows the feature extraction, and there is no single feature that has enough accuracy to serve as a marker of the condition. So the AUC curve for all features is about below 60. So what we had to do was to take these features, 48 altogether, so 12 features for each filter, 4 filters, altogether 48 features, and we put them in machine learning model. So you can see the diagram of our machine learning model on the left top panel. It consists of 2 layers. The first layer is the classifier. In this case, we use off-the-shelf classifier, random forest, and singular vector machines. A random forest is a little bit more accurate, but both classifiers give about 72, 74 accuracy. So in this case, we start with a wrong hypothesis. So our hypothesis, because we don't have ground truth data, the only thing that we have is the classification that we have from the clinicians, and we use this as a validation of the model. So our hypothesis is that all insomnia people have all nights as bad nights, and all normal sleepers have all nights as good nights, which obviously is wrong. However, we achieved a correct classification compared with the clinical diagnosis of over 82%. So the model is very sensitive, and even with the wrong hypothesis, we can obtain correct classification. So the second layer, the first layer does the classification, and it's a binary classification 0-1. The second layer, we have designed optimization to basically validate the model on the clinical hypothesis. So using this, we have achieved accuracy of the model. So the most balanced model where the accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity are balanced is about 82%, which is very good, taking into account that we don't have labels for the data, and we don't have a ground truth, and we start with a wrong hypothesis. If we want to increase the accuracy a little bit of sensitivity and specificity will give up as shown in the middle graph. And finally, the model gives us actually the threshold for the minimum number of nights for a good prediction. And these are 5 nights of accuracy. So if we have less than 5 nights of actigraphy, not accuracy, actigraphy, the model actually would not work. And anybody who wants to use our software, our tools, should know that data collection should include at least 5 nights of actigraphy. So the results, the features, as I said, no single features can be used as a marker. One of the best features are the statistical feature, the mean. Then after 20% and 40% noise removal, the dynamical features such as the Poincaré 1 and 2 maps, they start to become prominent, and also the sample entropy. And finally, the sleep diary features, which in this case are extracted entirely from the signal, also become prominent when we have 40 and 80% noise removal. So another result is that the model that we developed in 2017 for automatic detection of acute insomnia and the cycles also allowed us to find anomaly in during the daily regime of the people with acute insomnia. We found that they have interruptions of the so-called Bragg cycles, which are during the day the learning cycle. So the brain actually thinks best and learns best during 90 minutes cycles. So people with acute insomnia have interruption of this cycle shown with the yellow line here, and their learning is not so efficient as people with normal sleep. This to be further confirmed and verified, we need a very specific type of experiment, which is very difficult to design, mainly due to the ethics requirements of developed countries. So to finish our conclusion, what we were able to do is to derive automated tool for classification of acute insomnia compared to normal sleep, and chronic insomnia compared to normal sleep. This automated tool, which is our machine learning model, does not need to have sleep diaries or as a ground truth. The model is basically data-driven model because we do not have enough evidence to start with phenomenological model, top-down model, where we design some process for insomnia. The derived features for acute and chronic insomnia, they are all derived from objective physical movement data. These are wrist movement data. And no single features was found that can describe the condition alone. We also were, at the moment, actually, we are comparing the features for acute and chronic insomnia and are looking to try to identify the differences between these conditions. What we also established is that during the day, people with acute insomnia have interruptions of the 90 minutes Bragg cycles, and this interruption is much stronger than for people with chronic condition. Finally, we established tools and algorithms for assessment of sleep disorders, and our long-term program is to develop this tool for pre-screening of the condition with wearable devices at home environment. And I think that is my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Maia. Please, are there some questions? Maia, just I want to do a general question because I'm not a specialist on this topic. Your model actually, how can help the patients on insomnia?
First of all, the model, because it's at the moment we can embed, well, not embed, but we can implement the model on a wearable device. That's the purpose. So a person who wears, we're also looking at various Fitbits and off-the-shelf things that are sold by companies. Many of these companies claim that they have some models, but we have calibrated some of them and they're far from reality. So the purpose of the models is first to assist sleep clinicians with their data analysis. So they have a very objective type to support their conclusions. And secondly, to help ordinary people like me and you at home, if they wear at the moment actigraph or accelerometer, such as Philips triaxial accelerometer, and use home computer, they can in real time assess themselves, and this can prompt a visit to the doctor because, as I said, insomnia is self-reported. So people have actually to decide to go to the doctor to be diagnosed, and currently is severely underdiagnosed even in developed countries.
Okay, thank you, Maia. We can proceed now to the next talk from Professor Silvia Scarpetta from the University of Salerno. And the title is The Role of Noise in a Recurrent Network of LIF Units with both scale-free critical features and multiple collective oscillatory modes.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks everyone. I have the video. Can you see the condition, the slide?
Yes, everything is okay.
Okay, thank you.
We can hear you.
Ah, okay, you can hear me. Let's try again. Hello to everyone. Can you hear? This work has been done in collaboration with Ella and Antonio De Candia, and is a model of neural dynamics, so a network of spiking units that show both oscillatory collective pattern, phase doctor pattern, and scale-free avalanche and other critical features. So the motivation is it comes from the many emerging properties that are very intriguing that we've been observed in the cortex. For example, there are self-sustained oscillation and transient period of phase-locked synchronization also between regions that are very far apart in the cortex. This is a very recent paper showing that there is a phase synchronization with the phase also different from zero sometimes in some moment between high frequency oscillation in the human cortex. But also there is another intriguing feature of the cortex that are scale-free avalanche that have been observed in vivo at rest, but also in vitro. Here there are a slice of the cortex, and this is the spikes. These are the spikes that have been recorded in these slides. You see that the activity is composed of many bursts with some empty being between one burst and the other. If we measure the size of these bursts, we found that the size is distributed as a power law, also the duration of this avalanche is a power law, and this cutoff here is only related to the size of the system. So there is a scaling variant activity. In this intriguing scaling variant avalanche coexist with self-sustained oscillation system, with oscillation funds of oscillations. Indeed, recently it's been observed that if we go to see the shape of this avalanche, so the temporal profile of the avalanche, We see an inverted parabola for a low, depending from the resolution, for time resolution, while at this intermediate resolution, we see that the shape of the avalanche is modulated by the oscillatory behavior. So seems that if we filter out oscillations, also avalanche are not the same anymore. So avalanche are related to oscillation, and also the exponent of this power law depends probably from the ongoing activity that is oscillatory. So the question is there an interplay, which is the link between the neural avalanche and the phase-locked oscillatory memory? So we investigate this in a model, in a very simple model, and our idea is that the two things are very related, because in the same network, when we have this phase-locked oscillation, if we go at the border, at the instability line, then we see avalanche, scale-free avalanche, which correspond to short transient oscillation. So that coexist with short transient oscillation. So we investigate this in our model, that is a very simple model. We have a spike response model for each unit. And so the membrane potential just collects the incoming contribution from all the other units, plus some Poissonian noise. And all the dynamics is related to the value of this connectivity matrix. So the connectivity matrix in our model comes from the plasticity rule that has been observed in the brain, and we use this learning procedure based on the spontaneous plasticity to store some phase-locked oscillation. So we present this oscillation, apply the learning rule, and then we have our matrix, and we see how this connectivity matrix shape the dynamic of the system. So we also introduce some heterogeneity in the acceptability, and so we change the threshold of the unit, or the incoming connection, the strength of the incoming connection with the unit. So this is the same. And we see that is this competition between the phase synchronous oscillation, so this ordered pattern, and this disorder due to the heterogeneity and stochasticity that give rise to the scale-free avalanche and critical. First of all, we study if the network is able to work as a source in memory for oscillatory pattern. So we store many phase-locked oscillation with our learning rule, and then we check if the network really replay this pattern in a selective way. And we compute the storage capacity of our network, of our spiking network. Here are two example of network activity. So this is the replay of a pattern that we have stored, in which these neurons have to fire in such a sequence, while these other neurons have to be silent. Here is another instance of the network, so another replay that is more less successful. So if you measure the similarity between the stored pattern and the activity in the network, here we found a high value, but here is a quite lower value. So we can measure, we can take a threshold for all the parameters and measure how many patterns we can successfully retrieve and store and retrieve in the network. And so we can do a lot about this regime in which the network really works fine as associative memory force is locked pattern. And we also can measure how the firing threshold affect the frequency of the replay, or how it affects the kind of how many strikes per cycle we observe during this replay of this phase lock part. But interestingly, the interesting thing is what happened at the edge of this region where the network works as oscillatory memory. So we see that interesting things is not only in this region where actually the activity is ordered and the phase locked oscillation are replayed, but if we decrease excitability, so we change the threshold of the neuron, for example, if we decrease excitability, we go here in a regime where we have up and down alternation, so period of low activity uncorrelated, and then periods in which we have this ordered activity, so correlated activity, and then again low uncorrelated, and then again another pattern replay that is again emerged in the network. So the network is in between these two regimes of ordered activity and low uncorrelated activity. And in between, there is an activity that is very peculiar. Indeed, we see that here the distribution of the firing rate is bimodal, and if we go to measure at a fine resolution how this activity appears, we see that it's composed of many avalanches here in this region. And we can measure the size of the avalanche. And the critical regime, so in this position here in between the other two regions, we see that the distribution of size and duration is shown red and is a power law, while at the lower and the higher excitability, we have deviation from the power law. And notably, the exponent of this power law of size and duration is related to the exponent of the S as the function of T, K, by this scaling relation that is a well-known cracking relation among the exponents. And this occurs in the same regime in which we observe the order parameter going from 0 to 1 and the fluctuation of the parameter having a peak. If we go to look closer at the system, so we investigate all the phase space as a function of strength of excitability and strength of stochasticity, so noise intensity, we see that this power law behavior in the scale-free avalanche has been observed here in this region here, near in between the uncorrelated activity and the oscillatory activity, and we also see that for system of different size we have this collapse, so there is indeed scaling variance. While if we go to lower noise, so we see that the behavior of the network shows hysteresis. So if we increase stability here, the red line, we pass from low uncorrelated to oscillatory activity. While if we go on the other way around, we have oscillation up to the blue line, and then we switch to the uncorrelated activity. So there is hysteresis here, and the up and down alternation here with scale-free avalanche. So notably, this exponent that we found is 1.1, that is lower than 2, but I mean, there are some experiments showing exactly the value of K that is lower than 2, not in agreement with benching project because it's lower than 2. So it's possible that oscillation can interfere with avalanche and showing exponents that are different from the branching model. Okay, so thank you for the attention. In conclusion, our network show the coexistence of the oscillatory pattern and avalanche, and we see avalanche in the regime in which these oscillations are not anymore self-sustained. So at the edge of this regime, we found the criticality. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to respond to all questions.
Thank you very much, Silvia.
Thanks.
Are some questions for Silvia? Just let me ask about your scaling relations you refer about the K, beta, and tau. Is this scaling, I didn't understand well, is this scaling relation comes from your data, or it has a theoretical background?
So the scaling relation have a background in the crackling noise, so the works by Setna and other in another model, and but has been found to be true in the experimental data. So, and after that, in our model, we checked for this relation and also was satisfied. So it's both in our data, both in the original, crackling regional paper and in the experimental data.
Okay.
So also by Shu and collaborators.
Okay. Also, Maia wants to ask to have a question.
Please.
Maia, yes. You can unmute your mic.
I can hear you.
Maia, you can do your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
yes.
Now yes.
Right, okay, it's the earphones. Your order parameter, I didn't quite got it. You use order parameter in the model. So do you use some sort of Kuramoto model, or is it like order parameter of the phase transition divided in the physical way?
So actually we use a spiking network, so each neuron have a precise time of spiking. So we introduce a order parameter similar to the Kuramoto order parameter, and more similar to the Hopfield order parameter, since we measure how the phase of the activity is in phase with the pattern that we observe. So actually, maybe I can share the slide, the original slides. Don't know if I can share fast the slide to show the order parameter. So we just introduce an order parameter ad hoc for our network because it's a spiking network. So the idea is the same, is the idea to measure the similarity of the instance of spike and the phase relationship among spikes that have to be the same of the stored pattern. So it's a measure of similarity, but is introduced for a spiking neuron.
Okay, thank you. I got it. Thanks.
Okay, Silvia, thank you. We don't have much time. We should proceed directly to the third talk. Yes. With Barbara Benigni. Okay, yes. Barbara, you're here. And Barbara will speak about exploring the interplay between brain and mind in Alzheimer's disease.
Yes, let me share my screen.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Barbara Benigni, a PhD student in the group of Manlio and Domenico at Comune Lab in Trento, Italy. I firstly want to thank the organizer for giving me the opportunity to present my work today, exploring the interplay between brain and mind in Alzheimer's disease. From the literature perspective, there is evidence that damages to brain structure can affect the brain function and as a consequence the cognitive processes. But it's true also the other way around. so that the altered cognitive processes can influence brain structure and brain function. However, the complex interplay between brain structure, function, and cognitive processes remains still unknown. The lack of this knowledge makes it difficult to understand in time an ongoing disease. For example, the neurodegenerative disease of Alzheimer. Nowadays, 50 million of people suffer of Alzheimer in the world, and this number is expected to triple by the end of 2050. There is a new case every 3 seconds. This means that you blink twice and there's another one, and there's no cure. Nowadays, the clinical assessment combined the neuroimaging and the neuropsychological test that basically aims at the evaluation of the structural and the functional pathways, as well as the evaluation, the assessment of executive function and the cognitive function. Among the neuropsychological tests, there was one particular test that triggered our attention. This test is the semantic verbal fluency. Here, the neuropsychology asked the patient to pronounce all the words coming up to his mind belonging to some category. Here, for example, we see the category of animal, and the words are written in Italian because they are real data from the mental health department of we collaborate with. And so the patient, the neuropsychology asked the patient to retrieve from memory all the words belonging to category of animals. The patient start speak the word, and the neuropsychology take notes literally by hand of this word. At the end of the test, the neuropsychology gives a score that corresponds to the total amount of words pronounced. So our question was, but can we do better? And the intuition was to see the list of spoken words and not just a bunch of words, an amount of words, a number of words, but instead as a network of words consequently pronounced, and so a navigation of concepts in the human mind. The final idea is to build a new framework that enrich the clinical assessment with the information carried by the altered mental pathways emerging from the exploration of concepts in the human mind, thus resulting in an integrated diagnosis, resulting in a more complete mathematical and data-driven output. When dealing with the memory retrieval task, we came across two main schools of thought. One school of thought thinks that the semantic memory retrieval happens on a semantic space, and thus on a manifold of concepts that the human mind navigates. On the other hand, the second school of thought is that of semantic network, and so that the patient, the people explore concepts which basically are on a network. So the navigation happens on a network. Today, we present our work that aim to test the hypothesis of a latent geometry characterizing the human mind, the exploration of concepts in the human mind, and to assess if this geometry can capture the differences between healthy subject and patient at different stage of dementia. So what we do basically was first to find the formal mathematical representation of word, and thus the word embedding. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the word embedding, but basically here the words are embedded in a multidimensional space, and the idea is that the closer the word in this, the words in this multidimensional space, the closer the meaning. We rely on three main word embedding that I will call geometry from now on. And so the It geometry, that is a word embedding built starting from La Repubblica, which is an Italian newspaper. The Twitter geometry build starting from the tweets, and the Wikipedia building starting from the Italian Wikipedia. Then we take the data we have, around 200 patients, and we characterize the local exploration of each patient, 92 patients suffering of dementia, Alzheimer's disease, 93 suffering of mild cognitive impairment, which is a precursor of Alzheimer's disease, and 30 healthy control. So we take the test of this patient and we characterize their local exploration by means of 5 metrics that we define. The first metric is the maximum jump, which is the maximum distance between 2 spoken words in the geometry. Then the diameter of exploration, which is the maximum distance, whatever the order in the geometry, between 2 spoken words. And this is a proxy of the ability to change context during the whole test. Then we define the density of exploration, which is basically the total amount of word potentially retrievable during the test and contained in the hypersphere build starting from the radius of exploration. Then we compute the total distance, so we sum up basically the distance of all the word pronounced by a patient, and then the farness, which is the mean distance between 2 spoken words. Afterward, we provide the mesoscale organization of concept, basically through a semi-supervised clustering, and on this mesoscale organization, we build the networks of concepts. So we pass from a concept scale in the geometry to a network of concepts passing through a mesoscale organization of concepts, so the clustering. The idea is to map the navigation of concept into the semantic space. Let me briefly explain this point. For example, imagine to ask a patient to pronounce all the words coming up to his mind. If I say London, he would probably say Queen, which is in the yellow cluster, so I pick up the yellow cluster. Then King, which is still in the yellow cluster, so I pick up again the yellow cluster. And I do this algorithm with all the spoken word. And finally, what we do is, after having built a network of concept for each patient, we build a network of concept for each diagnosis. How? By leveraging of Markov chain. So we establish the probability to go from one cluster of concept to another cluster of concept by looking at the network of concept of that diagnosis. So we build the network of concept, the Markov chain for MCI, Alzheimer's disease, and control subject, healthy control subject. And so at the end, we will have 3 different network of concept, one for each diagnosis. For each Markov chain, for each network of concept, we find the steady state distribution and the mean first passage time matrices, and then we compare these 2 descriptors, so the steady state and mean first passage time matrices, by means of similarity measure between the 3 groups. What we found out at the concept scale, here we can see for the 3 geometry, we can see the distribution for the 5 matrix and for each diagnosis. We tested the significance of this matrix in discerning between healthy subject and the non-healthy subject by means of statistical tests. What we found out is that all the metrics that we define were able to discriminate between healthy and unhealthy patient in the 3 geometry. In particularly, the distance not only can discriminate between healthy and unhealthy patient, but also between different stages of dementia, so MCI and DEM. The Wikipedia geometry was also able to distinguish between healthy, non-healthy, and the 3 groups, so control, MCI, and Alzheimer's disease patient. At the mesoscale organization, we find some results that confirm what we found out at the concept scale. Here we basically present the explorative potential, which is the number of clusters explored by each diagnosis and the number of words contained included in that cluster for each diagnosis. We found out that this matrix is able to discriminate between healthy and non-healthy patients. And then we also tested the hierarchy through which the concepts are explored. And we find some correlation between MCI and them in the hierarchy through which concepts are explored. Here we can see the values of Baker's gamma correlation in the hierarchical clustering, in the exploration of the cluster, of the concept. Which denotes that there is a strong correlation between the hierarchy of MCI and them. And this is tested against a null model, which basically reshuffle the cluster label by maintaining the same number of visited clusters. Finally, here is the results at the macro scale, so the network of concepts, so the Markov chain that we built, and we see that non-healthy patients explore smaller portion of node with respect to healthy subject. Just to clarify, the color node encode the cluster, while the thickness of the link is proportional to the probability to go from one cluster to another. Unfortunately, with this approach, the one of the Markov chain, only some specific combination of geometry and correlation measure was able to highlight correlation between MCI and them. For example, if we take the correlation between the steady-state distribution and the mean first passage time of MCI and them in the ETWAC geometry and Twitter geometry, we see that the Spearman correlation is very high. But this is not in the Wikipedia. While in the Wikipedia is high the correlation between MCI and them if we take the Pearson correlation. So what we can conclude? Our aim was to test the hypothesis of a latent geometry behind the exploration of concept in the human mind. We examined the exploration concept starting from the concept scale, so the geometry, going to the network of concept, passing through the mesoscale organization of concept, so the clustering. And we found out that the geometry is able to discriminate between healthy and unhealthy patients, and also between different stages of dementia, so Alzheimer's disease and mild cognitive impairment. While the semantic network cannot be considered a robust approach. In fact, it is indicative but not definitive in discerning between healthy and non-healthy. The take-home message is that the geometric framework that we proposed is an effective and robust approach to investigate the semantic memory retrieval task and to assess its abnormal navigation in patients at different stages of dementia. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for this nice talk. Are some questions for Barbara? Barbara, just let me to ask, what about measures of an early stage Alzheimer, before the Alzheimer? Is there the geometric approach you proposed also sufficient to distinguish between healthy and people who are going to?
There are some metrics that are able to distinguish between healthy, all the metrics, sorry, are able to distinguish between healthy and unhealthy patient, but only some metrics are robust in all the geometry, so the word embedding that we applied indiscriminate also between MCI, which is an early stage of Alzheimer's disease, and Alzheimer's disease. So there are still some metrics that are not robust in all the geometry, but other are robust for the geometry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
If there is no any other question, we can proceed to the next talk on extraction of functional dynamic networks describing patients' epileptic seizures by Gaëtan Frusque.
Hello.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I share my screen. Up.
There is coming, it's okay.
So it's work?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me start. So hello, my name is Gaëtan Frusque. So thank you for being here. I am a PhD student from Laboratoire de l'informatique du parallélisme in École Normale Supérieure de Lyon, and I will make a talk about the extraction of functional dynamic networks describing patients' epileptic seizure. So let's put some context. First, I work on epilepsy. It's one of the most common neurological disorders, affecting 1% of the global population. And a huge proportion of these patients have epilepsies that are drug resistant. So a surgery can be proposed to remove the epileptic onset area. To do that, we use many measures. One of them is the use of electrodes that are implanted in the brain. There is contact that measures the neural activity. So there are several contacts along each road. So here is an example of implantation of this road for one patient. And thanks to this implantation, we can see the activity of several regions in the brain. The neural activity is presented in the form of neurophysiological signal, and by computing the similarity between each pair of signal, we can infer a graph that shows the region in the brain that activate synchronously in a time period. We can also detect some modules, which are the pathological cortical network of the epileptic seizure, and understanding the apparition, disparition, and temporal evolution of this module is of crucial importance for each patient to understand the specificity of their seizure and to give them the best medical treatment. So the data from the different contact of road are in the form of multivariate signals, and to infer from it a graph that evolves through time, we segment it. From each segment, we infer a graph showing the similarity between each pair of signals. By sliding this segment, we can see what is the state of this graph for the next temporal step. And by doing this in all the time series, we can infer from it a dynamical graph. Okay, so here is an example of a dynamical graph obtained for one seizure from one patient. In total, it's more than one contact that are used to record the neural activity. And at the end, it's the temporal evolution of more than 5,000 links that we have to consider. So it's very time consuming for the clinician. And we have to consider that we have to study several dynamical graphs like that, one for each seizure record for this patient. And so we have to propose some methodology to extract the relevant module and to in this dynamical graph, and to simplify the reading of this kind of object. So how we do that? Let me first introduce different mathematical representations that we can have of a graph. There is the adjacency matrix, but we prefer to use here the functional connectivity vector, which just is we place in a vector all the weight of a graph. So because we use dynamical graph, it can be seen as a succession of adjacency matrix. We can consider the concatenation of functional connectivity vector in a matrix, giving the functional connectivity matrix, showing the temporal evolution of each weight of the dynamical graph. So here is a proposed methodology. We first consider in entry the different multivariate signal, which are the recording of each seizure of a patient. The recording can have different duration. And from each recording, we infer a dynamical graph, which is made by a measure of functional connectivity varying in time. It's the first step of our pipeline, and the functional connectivity used here is the phase locking value. Okay, so from this dynamical graph, we reconfigure it in the form of functional connectivity matrix. And by using all the functional connectivity matrix from one patient for all the seizure recorded, we decompose it in a subgraph, which are the cortical network of the seizure. And we can know how the subgraph activates through time thanks to the activation profile. So here we see that the subgraph 1 activate at the end of the seizure 1, whereas it activates mostly at the beginning and the middle of the seizure 2. So now let's put some highlight on the second step of my pipeline, which is the decomposition of the several functional connectivity matrix. So we consider every functional connectivity matrix as a list, and we call this list X the S, where each one is a functional connectivity matrix of different duration. The model to decompose it is the following. It's called brain-wide time-varying network decomposition, BTND, and it leads to decompose the list of functional connectivity matrix in a matrix of subgraph containing the subgraphs that are common to each seizure, and we get activation profiles that are specific of each seizure. In order to get a relevant decomposition, we propose the following model. We want the subgraph to be sparse in order to have subgraph with few links, characterize only the most important feature of the epileptic state. And also we want activation profiles that are sparse and compact in order to select some step of the seizure. The final problem of the BTND decomposition is written here as an optimization problem. The complexity of our model is due to the several parameters to select. Here it's a fuse LISO constraint for the activation profile and L1 regularization for the matrix of subgraph. But we can select the activation profile parameters thanks to the duration of each seizure. Also, we show empirically that we can link the parameter lambda 2 and lambda 1 in only one parameter for the global sparsity of the decomposition, and another parameter which is related to the compactness of the activation profile. Okay, so now we apply our entire pipeline to get the pathologic cortical network from EEG recording. The decomposition used is a PTND presented previously. We apply this methodology on 9 different patients, and now we will show the results obtained for one specific patient. This patient have an epilepsy from the left temporal lobe. 3 seizures were recorded with intracranial electrode, and the BTND methodology was used to find 6 different subgraphs. Here is represented the left and right hemisphere of this patient with the location of the rod implantation. Okay. So here is represented the recording of one seizure of this patient for a subset of the contact. At the bottom is represented the activation profile provided by the BTND decomposition for the 6 subgraphs obtained. We can see that our activation profile are indeed sparse and compact, and they lead to the selection of the step of the seizure. We can see that here, the subgraphs 3 and 2 are related to the beginning of the seizure, whereas the subgraphs 3, 4, and 5 are related to the propagation step of the seizure, and the subgraph 5 and 6 for the end of the seizure. There is one subgraph that contain activation connections that are activated in all the recording. For a second seizure of this patient, we can see several order of activation of all the subgraph. We now represent at the left the raw dynamical graph obtained by phase locking value. We only represent here the most activated phase connection by thresholding this dynamical graph. At the right, we represent the subgraph obtained by BTND. They will appear with different color, and they will appear when the cursor here is in the corresponding activation period. We can see so how our method leads to the extraction of all the relevant features that appear in the dynamical graph. Now we compare the regions that are highlighted thanks to our method versus the regions that are considered too important to characterize the seizure thanks to the clinician. For the beginning of the seizure, the propagation step, and the end of the seizure. We see that our method leads to highlight all the main, most important regions. Our method also highlights other regions, and it's a future work to see if these regions are interesting to study in a clinical setting. So to conclude, we developed a pipeline to extract the pathological network from EEG recording of epileptic seizure. A clinical application was performed. Our method captures the main dynamical property of the seizure, and the proposed method can complement the visual analysis of the EEG signals. As a perspective, we show here only a subgraph with strong activation, but it can be also interesting to show subgraph where regions are activated before the seizure, but that deactivate during the start of the seizure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Some questions for Gaëtan? Okay. You may use the chat or you ask Gaëtan by any mail or another contact. This session is at the end. Thank you very much, first of all, the speakers for the interesting talks, and also all of you for attending. Depending on your position, have a nice day or a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.